Hello there, and welcome to In and Around Podcasting, the inclusive industry podcast, where we highlight a range of powerful podcasting perspectives. And today's show is a little different. It is a review of podcast movement evolutions in Los Angeles last week, which was a fascinating event. Always great to see everyone out there. And I was there, of course, along with Kieran McKeefrey, Captivate's CTO, head of tech, director of all things code. And I am, of course, Mr. Mark Asquith, that British podcast guy. I'm going to be joined today by just one co-host. Normally we have a number of co-hosts to highlight that range of powerful podcasting perspectives. But because it's a review, I'm joined by the ever-present Mr. Danny Brown. How are you, mate? You all good?
I'm very good, mate. Missed you last week. Obviously, you had a lot of fun, a lot of good stuff at the podcast movement event. But I think I managed to hold it okay, so we're all good there. But yeah, good to have you back.
Yeah, it was a good chat last week. If you've not heard it, if you were at Podcast Movement, maybe a little bit behind on your podcast industry podcasts, go and check out Does AI Need Regulation in Podcasting with @Podcat and @Deirdre Sheehan as well. So it was really, really, really interesting, conceptual, ethical chat around the morality of AI, the use cases of AI, and so on and so forth. And I think we're only going to hear more and more of that. And I've got to say, it cropped up a little bit at Podcast Movement as well, but maybe we'll get to that one in a second. Now, if you like the podcast, of course, you can listen in your podcast app of choice. You can tune in at inandaroundpodcasting.com. You can join the conversation at inaroundpodcast over on Twitter. I still refuse to call it X. It's simply not happening. It's just not going to happen. So let us know if you were there. Let us know at Podcast Movement. What did you enjoy? Were there anything that you maybe like to change? Let us know what you thought at In Around Podcast. Stick around as well, because while I was out there, I took the opportunity to chat to some friends. And of course, what am I going to chat to them about when I want to record something for In and Around Podcasting? Obviously, I could do the flattering ram. Obviously, I could do the wonderfully whimsical podcasting wish list or the wave file, but where's the fun in that? So I just got everyone to do a stupid stuff in podcasting. We've got Justin Jackson from Transistor. We've got Sam Setti from True Fans. We've got Doc and Katie from Ecamm, plus many more. You'll find that here on the audio version right at the end of this chat and on the YouTube version as well. So, Danny, you got Denver. I got LA. Sorry, not sorry, dude.
Yeah, it's Denver's nice. I mean, they've got some great craft breweries there. So I was happy.
Denver is great, man. And you went in August as well. To interrupt, sorry, but you went in August, man. It's not like it's bad weather.
No. I think it was 26 to 28 degrees every day, like real glorious. There was like a couple of days where it was really rainy, but even then it's still warm. So no, and the location, the hotel that they had, the event center, beautiful. So yeah, it was a really good event, but obviously different because that was Podcast Movement and you were at Evolutions, which is like a different, I think it's more business side on Evolutions, right?
Well, I think that's something to discuss in the review, actually. I think that's something that's certainly not an issue, but I think it's certainly a challenge that I think we'll probably get to. But yeah, you're right. Denver's an amazing place. I love Denver. It's quite a good startup community up there as well. There's Boulder just on the doorstep, huge for startups. I think the SendGrid guys are up there. There's a lot of accelerators, Techstars, and so on up in Denver and Boulder. So it's that area is sort of known for its thriving community and capabilities in getting things done, I think, which is quite interesting. And then LA is LA, two theoretically very different people like Kurtco over there that are getting more into the space. And it's just, there's a lot of talent there, a lot of celebrity talent there. So I understand LA. And I think that would sort of be my first bit of feedback, I guess. The JW Marriott, like, it's almost not even worth mentioning because it's just a good hotel. There's almost nothing to say about the hotel itself. It's just a good space. Everything is fine. However, I think the Podcast Movement event is a fantastic one. And regardless whether it's industry or not, I feel that because Podcast Movement tours and moves, I feel personally, and this is only opinion, I think I'd just like to go to LA every time for Evolutions. Like, there's something interesting about Podfest where you go back to Podfest every year, you know the lay of the land, you get comfortable with the bars, you get comfortable with the flight in, the flight out, the hotels, the location. And it's sort of, it's a very simple event to get to and to enjoy, because you sort of don't have to worry about the lay of the land, if that makes sense. So, and I feel the same way about the podcast show in London as well. It's at the Business Design Centre, and whether they move it in the future, I doubt they will, but if they do, they do. But it's just there. It's every single year it's in the same place, and it's just very useful from a perception perspective, I think, as well. Okay, it's always there. It's very interesting. So I think that'd be my first little bit of feedback, is that I love the touring element of Podcast Movement. Like, I've been all over in whatever the last 10 years with Podcast Movement, and, you know, count Jared and Dan as close friends. I really, really enjoy spending time with them. But it's I think that's my bit of feedback, is maybe just stay in LA, because, you know, it's the industry, and LA feels media. It feels entertainment. Do you know what I mean? Does that sort of make some sense? Or is it just me being a bit like, I want to get in the sun?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, mate. You know, we know how much the Brits love the sunshine. No, I think that's a good point. I know with the Denver one, awesome, like I said, awesome hotel, awesome location, but it did have some podcasters saying it was hard. It was like, because it was far away from Denver itself, the location, it kind of felt isolated. But it did still mean that anybody could get there because it was close to the airport. So it was like a 20-minute cab ride, maybe tops, from the airport. So easy access that way. And I think it's good from a podcaster point of view to go on a tour, because now you're opening it up to anybody. You know, not everybody can get to LA easily. Not everybody can get to one location easily as a podcaster. So it makes sense for an industry-led show to be in one place, maybe especially where there's a lot of media already, you know, because the mediums are crossing. You mentioned Wondery, you mentioned obviously Hollywood's there, and a lot more actors and celebrities are in podcasting now. We see that, you know, with the shows that are coming out at Global, for example. So I do think it does make sense from an industry point of view. Have it one place, everybody knows what to expect, and it's very focused then on the business side of things. Whereas Podcast Movement, take it around and come to Canada. Jared, come to Canada. That's it.
Come to Canada. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we there was talk years ago about like a Podcast Movement Europe, and we'd sort of chatted about that at length, Podcast Movement UK, whatever. And then the podcast show sort of took a little bit of that initiative and sort of did it post-COVID. And you know, anything that is transatlantic is expensive. If you're in one country and you're doing something in another, it's not easy. But yeah, that would be a just my bit of feedback would be, if it's gonna be industry, just LA just feels industry. You know, LA or New York personally just feels industry. You've got a hot pod over there. You've got, you know, that whole concept of the podcast industry, and I think that's why London does so well and why the podcast show does so well, because here in Europe, London is the hub. You know, you've got Global, you've got the BBC, you've got the Guardian, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph. You've got all of these people that are really taking up the top spots. Even some of the networks like Sky, like, you know, people like Channel 4 and ITV, some of the rewatch stuff, they're all in one place. And it feels like LA is like the spiritual counterpart of that in the US. So I just feel that it could be, I don't know if it would benefit from it, but I just feel it sort of sounds logical and feels logical. And I know there are logistical and financial incentives and challenges to overcome and whatever else, but it feels like Podcast Movement industry stuff sort of needs a home. Like, it needs to be just bound to somewhere where you might be able to add a bit of demarcation between, okay, here's the creator stuff and here's the industry stuff. Because I think if you've got Evolutions and you're touring it, and we'll get to some of the content in a bit, but then you've got Podcast Movement and you're touring it, I just feel that it will continue to become more difficult to separate the two in terms of tickets and who wants to go. And like I said, I mean, overall, the event was wonderful. I think Jared and Dan and the team do an outstanding event. The programming was good. The exhibit hall and the exhibitors, it's a lot smaller than the main Podcast Movement. There's no real trade show floor. It's more, you know, you were there at Podcast Movement, and we'll find the same at the podcast show, and then Podcast Movement again when we're there in DC in August. But like, it's one area, isn't it? You go in, it's a trade show, you know, and you felt that there, I'm sure. And there's everyone from the big Spotifys and whatever of the world And then there's everything in between. There's people dumping merch on tables, and then there's people like us that have got the booth. So you've seen that yourself, haven't you?
Yeah, and that's what I did like about it. It was my first podcast movement. I'd been to some podcasting events, but this was my first one where it's such a big one. And I did enjoy the fact that it covered everyone from small indies that were there to learn and grow and, take a whole bunch of, education on board, right up to large companies like Apple meeting with podcasters and talking about plans, etc. And I feel something like that is important for the industry because it does allow, I'd never, as a podcaster, I'm fortunate to work with Captivate and Global's got the reach, etc. But as a podcaster, I could probably never sit down with one of the lead people at Apple and discuss what's coming down with Apple Podcast. So I feel, podcast movements is movements. Can we cut this as well? I did it bad for like OnlyFans and True Fans the last episode. Now I'm talking about movements. Podcast movement, I think it's ideal to allow that, that whole combination, bring everybody together. So yeah, I'd like to, and it makes sense. We know that the podcasting industry is a serious thing. Big shows, big names, lots of money in the industry. But I still feel it's looked down when you compare it to movies and music, for example. And that comes down to the fact that there's no one regular place that the whole industry comes together to discuss what's coming next, for the industry. Unlike what happens in Hollywood, unlike what happens with radio, etc., and TV. So yeah, the demarcation makes a lot of sense from that point of view, I feel.
Well, actually, I think the two sides of that. So the trade show element of podcast movement is very much about, let's take our hosting company and connect with podcasters. We don't have a booth at Evolutions because if it is industry, there's absolutely no point in us in exhibiting to the industry. We're there to speak and to enjoy company and to see friends and to learn ourselves and to also network B2B style, us talking to other, like we did the Podcast Standards Project meeting. So things like that mean that we wouldn't necessarily exhibit at Podcast Movement. Now, the trade show element of Podcast Movement, Evolutions, it's much, much smaller, like 2 corridor levels. But actually, it's the same kind of exhibitors. So like Blueberry are there, Libsyn are there. And you're sort of like, well, okay, so these guys are hosting companies. Why would they go and exhibit? If it's to the industry, what do they get from it? That becomes quite an interesting challenge. So like park that up for a second and we'll come back to that. But the other side, an interesting point that you make is, if the Grammys, the Oscars, they're in big locales. And it feels like we've got a lot of award ceremonies. We've got the Independent Podcast Awards in the UK, the Independent Women's Podcast Awards. We've got the Webbies that podcasting sort of touches. But then we've got the Ambies, which feels it's a very new thing, a relatively new thing. Podcast Hall of Fame, which is out of Podfest. But we've got the Ambies, all right? So take the Ambies. There was a party after the Ambies. There were the Ambies on Tuesday night. So Podcast Movement ran from like Tuesday night until like Friday midday. It makes sense for the biggest awards ceremony or the most, maybe not the biggest, certainly not the most OG, but it makes sense for for an awards ceremony that is trying to position itself as the Oscars of the industry. It makes sense for that not to be in Chicago and for that not to be in, all right, Vegas I can get on board with because there's the glitz and the glamour and the wildness. But it feels like an LA thing. It just feels like, so everything seems to fit, so that would be a big bit of feedback. Everything, I think, was really well done. I think it's an amazing event. But I think the challenge as well, one of the interesting challenges is, it's hard. It's hard to say no to creators. All right, so let's kind of take that feedback from the trade show element. Why would Libsyn and Blueberry and whatever turn up to exhibit B2B? Maybe they'll pull in some networks. Maybe. That's cool. But you could probably do that like a fraction of the cost and without flying 3 team members out, for argument's sake. You could do that just through existing and marketing. So it's sort of right. So you've got this thing where Libsyn and Blueberry and the other hosting companies might want to go out there and talk to creators. So then you get creators thinking, I'm going to go to Podcast Movement Evolutions, even though it's billed as industry. So at which point does the definition of industry become truly imbued by the event? Because there's a lot of talks there that are like, all right, you've got the the Pod News report card as the opening keynote, then a big celebrity like Amy Poehler, and then you've got like the Infinite Dial, and then you've got like, industry people giving industry insights. I did a panel on like the future of podcast monetization, which was intended to be an industry future panel, as opposed to like, here's how to make money as a creator, okay? But the programming was really interesting. And it's the same problem that occurred, I think, with any podcast conference. Because there were also tracks around beginners and creators. And the content's great, there's nothing wrong with that. But you still got talks like 5 mistakes that you shouldn't make starting a podcast. And obviously everyone was talking about AI, everyone was talking about video and whatever. But again, nothing wrong with that. But it's not industry. So I think one of the big challenges I feel that faces most conferences, we saw it at the podcast show last year, right, in May. Year 1, it was too industry-led. Year 2, they did more creative stuff, and I sort of work with them on steering that a little bit. This year, they've got a dedicated creator area, which I think is a really smart move, and we're doing a lot of work with them on that, and we're working to that, doing some panels there, doing a workshop there. We're going to be, we're sponsoring it and whatever else. But it was very much a media-based show that then added creator stuff because creators turned up and were a little bit miffed that they paid their money and there wasn't that much for creators. Even though I was doing stuff for creators, but and others were, it was very much like the minority. So they've sort of refined that and they've gone, right, we are an industry show and here's a creator, not just a track, but an area, a place where you can come. And this is an industry show, but if you are a creator and you want to come, this is your pocket of content. And this is the area that it will be delivered. And all the sponsors will be there that will help you. And the BBC can be over there and Spotify can be over there. That's fine. And Global will be taking up that massive corner. If you don't feel you need that, that's cool. Come to the creator stuff. And I think Podfest had a similar challenge a few years ago where, you would get people like when Himalaya chucked all the money at, sponsoring everything for that year. They took a massive space there, but they didn't really do much for creators. So then what you end up with is Chris making this decision to go really deep into the creator space. And the Podfest is for creators. And I think podcast movement it has challenges because it is, frankly, it's the oldest and it is the best. It is the best overall podcasting conference in the world. But because of those things, everyone wants to go. So it's almost hard to say, well, let's not do creator stuff at this industry event because people want to go to a podcast movement and it's holiday season in August. So they can't go because the kids want to go away. So I just feel there's a challenge that could be built upon where it's here's an industry thing and you go if you are in the industry and you want to learn from the industry and it's all about the future of the industry and where the industry is today. But I think there's some lessons that can be learned from maybe the podcast show. I don't think podcast movement in August or July, when they do it in July, needs to change. I think that's perfect. But this one, I feel just needs to have a little bit of, if you're a creator, there's a very specific branded space for you that is the creator zone, the creator stage, the creator whatever, where they could embrace it being an industry event, but also say, hey, we listened and we heard you. I know you're a creator and you want to come to LA because it's LA and you probably can't, maybe you can't come to in August and you want to learn from these other people. Here's the space for you. And all the best industry people are going to be here. So you will get a chance to talk to Apple or Captivate or Libsyn, Blue, whatever. So it's all, I know I've spent a lot of time chatting on that one, but it's crazy because it's not a big thing, but it would just tighten the nuts a little bit and just make it feel like, okay, Evolutions genuinely is this and podcast movement is genuinely this. Whereas now it's sort of like, it feels like we say it's for the industry and it is for the industry because there's a hell of a lot of content, but I don't think there's any less content for the industry at Podcast Movement, and I don't think there's any less content for creators at Evolutions. So it almost feels like a branding thing as much as anything. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit, I know I've rambled on about that, but it's just, I think it's a complex problem because everyone wants to go to a podcast movement. And why would you say no to creators? Why would you say no to the industry? I just feel like it's a complex issue, dude.
It is. And I think there's two ways to look at it. I think if you look at the name of each event, so you've got podcast movement, you've got podcast movement evolutions. Evolution to me talks about the evolution of the industry, where it's gone, where it needs to go, for podcasting to be taken as seriously, that come back to the whole series point, as movies and music and other mediums and other forms of entertainment. And I think look at Podfest, it's a festival for podcasters. Look at Podcast Show London, it's a podcast show. It's not got industry in the name. It's not got. So I think you can be very clear with the naming and the branding, to your point, of where creators will enjoy and get the most benefit from, and where maybe the industry needs to have a clear solo single event like Evolutions. And maybe if you do want to bring creators on, and show that the likes of Apple, Spotify, plus the hosting companies, plus the podcast app companies and the podcast index, etc., have all been looking at what creators have been saying and what podcasters have been saying and what they need. Maybe have an offshoot, well, not an offshoot, maybe just have like an evening event where you have the heads of, so maybe someone at Apple, someone from Spotify, someone from one of the bigger networks, and then some of the host companies. That's where you bring the creators in, and maybe even pay for their flights in. Put up, say, 10 or 20 create break and experience for them. I don't know how you choose them, because I'm sure that would cause a lot of issues. But I didn't get picked.
Ballot.
Exactly, right.
Democracy has to rule when you're giving money away.
Yeah. So what I think that would be an idea is, it comes down to your branding point. Evolution talks about where the industry needs to go, and it's all industry focused. But on the midweek evening of the event, we're going to bring creators in to talk to these big people that you'll never normally get to speak with, and listen, hear what their plans are. Like at Evolution, YouTube, I haven't watched the video yet, but I hear YouTube talked about where they see podcasts and how YouTube's going to approach us. I'm looking forward to that talk and that track. But offer feedback and, see that feedback's been given, accepted. Sound like David Brent there, given, accepted, leaned upon. So I think there's an opportunity. Evolution, to me, is an industry show because it is talking about the evolving space.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I just think it's, excuse the pun, but I think that event is an evolving event as well, like the podcast show did, like Podcast Movement originally did. And like I said, I feel that just because it's the biggest brand in podcasting events, and Jared and Dan are the leaders in that, I think they are, as people, they are very forward thinking. They're exceptional at what they do. And I think that there are brand challenges that other shows wouldn't have, because, like I said, everyone wants to go to a podcast movement, which is amazing to see. Like, what a position to be in for everyone in the industry, to see that from, through the lens of being, I've been going 10 years. And it's fascinating to see it. And it's a very privileged position for us all in the industry to be in. But it's how do you evolve that to deliver on the tagline and the branding in such a way that the demarcation is clear. Because I'd rather go to 2 podcast movements a year, right? I probably can't go to the one in August because it's August and I've got to take the kid on holiday. So it's if it was I've got to go because I've got to go because it's work and blah, 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 and I don't get to do the same stuff in LA that I get to do in Washington, that sell becomes easier internally because it is clearly different. So I don't know the answer to it. And I don't want to dedicate any more time to it because I've rambled on about it. But I love your idea, like meet the industry, and they used to do like speaker mixers where everyone could come meet with the speakers and all that sort of stuff. So like meet the industry and so on and so forth. I feel like things like that are really, really interesting. And I love the party element of it as well, in that, you can do that at the parties. You can go to the parties and you can meet everyone that turns up at the parties, but there's no guarantee that the right people that you want to meet are going to turn up at the party. So very interesting concept, that, dude, and I think it's an interesting problem. That they'll inevitably evolve the solution to as time progresses, because that's what they do. The parties, we've just got to probably finish up on the parties. Like it's hard because there's no point me talking about the location. It's like downtown LA. It's easy to get to. It's a good location. The hotel's brilliant. There was nothing wrong at all with the place. It was brilliant, brilliant place. So it does just leave the parties, which were great. Tom's Watch Bar was the main party, and it's great. Like I just feel that, again, you can't really get parties wrong. You know, everyone does their own offshoot meetups. We went to a Riverside meetup, and we did the Podcast Standards Project lunch and whatever else. There are people doing their offshoot meetups for like Ambi's after parties and all that sort of stuff. All cool stuff. But the main party is really the place where people come together. And it was great. They knocked it out of the park. I mean, frankly, I spent like 90 minutes just sat outside drinking with Dan and Jared and Kieran. So like, I wasn't in there a ton. But when I was in there for the couple of hours I was in there, it was great. You know, you were seeing old friends, you were seeing people who were meeting for the first time. Everyone's kind of buzzing off podcasting and really getting a good vibe from it. And it just, you know, after COVID, like that is such a good thing to see. And it's hard to review it, but it was just good to see it, man. Do you know what I mean? And I'm sure you felt that in Denver as well. Just get everyone together and it just feels good.
Yeah, and that's when, apart from one where it wasn't so great because it was in a small little craft brewery, and you're trying to get, say, 1,000 people into this little area. So the lineups and that for food and that weren't good. But apart from that, that was just feedback from the podcasters. Yeah, it was great to connect with podcasters that use Captivate and hear how they're using it and give them little tips. You know, look out for some really cool stuff that's coming down. Meeting industry people. You know, you mentioned, Justin from Transistor. Met Dave from Libsyn and School of Podcasting. I think Todd was there from Blueberry. So we caught up with Todd. Dave, I mentioned Dave, James from Pod News. So I think, again, it's an awesome opportunity for creators and podcasters to meet people that they might not normally meet, and just meet other podcasters and see what worked for them. Tell them you enjoy their show. You know, hearing people that listen to your podcast saying, "Hey, I really enjoyed episode X." It's really, from a geek and a nerd like me, it'd be like me talking about, season 1, episode 7 of The Bad Batch and how awesome that was. With I likewise Star Wars fan, so. Yeah, the after show parties and being able to just connect and switch off from a really busy day, obviously, in nice surroundings is always a nice way to catch up and also learn more about the industry and what's coming down the line, etc.
Yeah, I agree. That's where you make the best connections. It's where you do the most business. It's where you get, it's where things really happen. And I think that's important to remember, because if you come, especially if you're tired after the event or you're coming from overseas, you are going to be sort of tired. But I think that I would heartily suggest even miss a couple of hours of the daily conference. If you're really struggling, miss 2 hours of the afternoon to make sure you can get to the parties, because that is where the meat happens. It's where it really kicks in. It's where you really get the results and the follow-ups, because everyone's a little freer. Everyone's a little bit less, a little bit less in business mode. And you actually do more business when people are a little bit freer with their thinking and their logic and the way that they want to approach things. So you do get so much from those parties. So I highly recommend that everyone gets there. So yeah, I mean, Podcast Movement Evolutions 24. I always love going. I love the team. I love Jared and Dan. I love seeing all my friends there. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time now. I see a hell of a lot of people there that I know and respect. We do a lot of good work there, so I'm always very keen to go and grateful for the event being put on by the team at Podcast Movement. Always recommend them. I think there's a few, even though we've spent a lot of time today talking about some of the wrinkles that need potentially just identifying. These certainly aren't big things, and I would always recommend that everyone. I think if you're in podcasting, you owe yourself at least one Podcast Movement, whether it's the one in summer or whether it's the one in spring. I think you owe yourself at least one Podcast Movement, because I think it will take you out of your comfort zone and it will allow you to move forward with deeper thinking broad thinking that will help you to progress in ways that you maybe couldn't have done yourself. So highly recommend it. And you're off to DC, aren't you? You're going out for Podcast Movement in August.
Is this being
Well, you are
officially
now.
Is this
It
being
is
announced
now.
now?
This
Or
is
you just
an
like teasing
announcement.
me and then saying,
Yeah.
no, Danny, you're not. Sorry.
No, you can do it. You're closest. You could probably drive. What's Toronto to DC? Easy. What, an hour?
That means it's closer than where I live then.
Oh.
I don't know. It's maybe 5-6 hours. You could probably drive it. I don't know what it is. But yeah, it's
I
not
wouldn't
too
bloody
far. It's
drive
on
it,
the East
though.
Coast, same coast as where I am. So yeah.
Oh, right. Well, you'll be able to see Danny. Everyone that's listening to this that likes Captivate and beyond, you will be able to see Danny and the rest of the Captivate team out there in DC. And I highly recommend that you do get to either Evolutions or to Podcast Movement in Summer as well, because I do think it will help you as a podcaster. But let's switch gear and do some of this. I was out there chatting to friends, and of course, in Los Angeles, the drinks are flowing, the knowledge is flowing, and people are just enjoying being part of podcasting. So what did I do? I took my little lapel mics out there, and I said to some friends, what annoys you? What's grinding your gears? And we did a whole range of stupid stuff in podcasting. So sit back and enjoy our friends from Podcast Movement Evolutions giving you their very own
Stupid stuff in podcasting.
Justin Jackson from Transistor, co-founder of Transistor, and the first time we've ever met, which is wild.
Yeah.
Because we've just been in the same space for a long time now. This is insane.
Yeah.
This is insane. So it's good to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you too.
We got some stupid stuff, inevitably. So, Justin, what grinds your gears, mate? What is going on that annoys you?
I mean, it's not super annoying, but there is this kind of myth that the gear you get in podcasting doesn't matter. So it's like, get whatever you need. Just start with whatever you have. I think that's good advice if you're just like practicing,
Mm-hmm.
but the gear does matter. You need to sound good. And if it really grinds my gears, if someone recommends a show and either their gear's not good or their sound setup's not good. Like this one show, he would always ask me to promote it for him.
Right.
But he had a squeaky chair.
Oh, no.
And I was like, how did he not think to like, is he listening back to his own show? It's
Just
like,
lube the chair, man.
yeah. Lube the chair. Lube the chair. So I think gear matters. Sound quality matters is the big takeaway. And if you do have to have it, it's a myth that you can like just start a show and it can sound like crap and it'll do okay.
Right? I get that. It's like the old, back in the day with the websites. Let's make a website, everyone's going to visit it.
Yeah.
It simply won't work. And it might have done when there were 3,000 websites.
Yes.
Like when there was 100,000 podcasts. If you were only, if you were one of 5 in a niche, maybe you could get away with bad sound. But the entire industry just got better.
Yes. I think the reason people give that advice is because it's, on one hand, it's like, oh, just get the gear and you'll automatically be good. Well, of course, that's not true. It's like good sound is necessary, but not sufficient to have a good show. So, but on the other thing, it's like you can't have amazing content and a squeaky chair.
The squeaky chair's killed me.
Yeah.
That's like, because that's perpetual. It's not, I'm not recording and suddenly my neighbor starts mowing the lawn and that goes away.
Yeah.
That's perpetual annoyance.
Yeah, I would say mowing the lawn is like, okay. Squeaky chair is like, you're above the red watermark,
Another thing as well on that point, the thing that I think is frustrating for people is that you can even have good gear but bad technique as well. So you could buy an SM7B, you could buy a Procaster or a PR40, whatever. And if you're holding it out here, so I feel like you almost need these days, and I don't want to put a barrier up for people to start, but you need a bit of cognizance that maybe I should look at what other people are doing. And now YouTube's, everyone's podcasting on YouTube. Look at how people have their mic. Don't have your mic out here. Just that's a huge thing.
I mean, even I'm not great at any of this, but even me, I'll often listen back and just listen to how do I sound? Could this be better? If you have an editor, you can ask them like, how does this sound? How can I be better? And then there's all these amazing ex-broadcast people that are like coaching now. This is the thing, like all these radio people really know how to be on the mic.
Right.
And it's almost like in podcasting, we've just been like, forget about those people. But they have a lot to teach you. Like you just find one of these ex-radio people and say, I just want you to teach me how to be on the microphone, even how to speak without having too many ums and ahs. Like they've developed all this technique.
That's such a big thing because I've got a lot of filler words.
Yeah.
And I have to be very conscious. But I don't know if you find this, but whenever I start a new segment or sentence, so if I'm coming, let's say you finished and I'm about to jump in, I have to really force myself to just continue the topic as opposed to maybe reiterating what you've said or validating what you've said in some way. There's no need for me to do that. And that's like an extension of the filler words.
Yes.
The technique is huge, but as you said, there's no point having great technique with bad gear.
Great technique, bad gear, or good content with bad sound, I think is the myth. The myth is that you can just start with whatever and people will listen. And all people with an iPhone while they're driving, like a lot of people want to like have a podcast while they're driving.
That's a thing too, isn't it? Oh my word!
And maybe you could do it if you had a good microphone, but it ends up not sounding very good,
Right.
and then you just can't listen to it.
And why don't I get sponsors when I've got a podcast and that's what everyone said I should do? Is just do it in the car, put it out, I'll become rich, right?
Yeah. No, the bar has definitely increased.
Yeah.
And it needs to sound good these days. You can't get away with just a crackly mic, squeaky chair. So lube your chair. That's the
Lube your chair right now. And that is Justin Jackson's stupid stuff in podcasting. Thank you, man.
My stupid thing in podcasting is so many people believe that I'm just going to make this show, I'm going to shoot it, I'm going to publish it with Captivate, and 1,000 people are going to come and listen. No marketing whatsoever. Now, I'm Doc, she's Katie, ECAM marketing department, so maybe we're a little jaded, but somehow you've got to let people know that you have this show. They do not just show up. So it's very important. And I think there's things that you can do very simply with Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, tweets, X's, LinkedIn. I think there's so many ways to market this show.
And there's so many great tools out there right now. Doc was just talking in his session about all of the AI tools available to you. So there are no excuses anymore. It's so easy to clip up video, audio, to be able to repurpose it in virtually every way.
Right. I think there's no better time to be a creator than now, especially because the tools have made it so easy that it's not a very complicated thing anymore, and it's not very expensive.
If we can do it,
if we can do it, you can. If Mark can do it, anybody can do
I
it.
know.
So make sure you market this thing. No one's going to just show up. Not even your mom. You have to send your mom a commercial. Let her know you're in it. So that's my stupid thing.
All right, I'm here with Stephen Robles from Primary Tech and Riverside. Two of my favorite things, actually, in podcasting. And guess what? We got some stupid stuff in podcasting. What's grinding your gears, my friend?
I mean, I'm still hearing people recording podcasts in Zoom, which I just have to say, you don't want to do that anymore. You get low quality audio and video. You can get blips, freezes, or all in the recording. You don't want to do that.
It's not COVID anymore. You don't have to do it.
Exactly, yeah. It got too big too quick. Listen, Riverside.fm, you record locally. You can record on your iPhone, your devices, your Android device, high quality video and audio. So that's one thing. Don't record anymore on Zoom. It's 2024.
Sounds like a sponsored plug, but Danny, I assure you, because Danny's my co-host.
Okay, very good.
I assure you, there is no money changing hands.
None at all. Now, I will say one other thing. I still have people wanting to start a podcast in 2024 about anything and everything.
Right.
They want to comment on current events, on sports, on politics. Don't do that. You can't do that. You know, when there was only like 3 podcasts out there, maybe you could develop a show like that based around a personality, but you kind of really needed to have an audience before that. And so if you're going to start a podcast in 2024, find your niche, find a topic you're passionate about, and then approach it. Try and find a different way. If you really love sports, and so you want to do a podcast about it, don't just comment on all sports everywhere. You're just not going to find an audience. You already have athletes, former athletes with podcasts. So find a niche specifically to you that you could talk about, that you have expertise in, or you have a perspective that no one else does, and that's going to attract an audience. And people think if you're too niche, the audience will be too small. And I find it to be the opposite. I've seen podcasts about pens, like literal pens, which is you would think a very small audience, but if you make a compelling podcast, you tell compelling stories, it doesn't matter what you podcast about, as long as it's niche, find your audience, then they'll attach to you as the host, and you'll grow your audience over time.
I think that's a huge thing. I think as well you can go even tighter in 2024 and beyond.
Yeah.
I remember we used to work with someone who still runs a fantastic podcast network. He started out with one show,
Right.
and he had 3-figure downloads per episode. And I'm not talking like 999. These were
Low three figures.
Yeah, and it was a fantastic show, but it served such a tight niche that within about 6 months, this guy genuinely became a 6-figure podcaster. And it was, don't get me wrong, he back then was an outlier, but he's still doing it, and more people are cropping up doing this very thing. And people are scared of tight niches, even still.
Right. And I would say, I've heard of like real estate agents start a podcast talking about real estate in their geographical area, and every episode only gets a few hundred downloads, but the leads they get, the podcast is a lead generator rather than a podcast audience growth mechanism. So think about like, what is your goal? Just having numbers for numbers, is it because you want sponsorships? Well, maybe explore like what is the motivation for starting the podcast, and maybe you don't need a big audience for it to be an effective show for what you're trying to do.
I think what we're saying is that two dudes sat around drinking beer talking about anything probably ain't going to fly as well as it
There's
used
enough of them out there. There's celebrities doing it. You don't need to do it. Don't do it.
All right, Stephen, thank you ever so much, man. Good to
Yeah,
see
man,
you.
it's a pleasure.
Love it. Love primary tech.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Check it out.
I'm Rob Walsh with Libsyn, and I am co-host of the Feed podcast. Okay, so stupid stuff in podcasting. Stupid comment I hear all the time. I'm going to do video because it's going to grow my show. And then I go, but what about your video is going to grow it? What are you doing? Oh, it's just us sitting at a table talking. And that's going to grow your show how?
I'm Dave Jackson, head of podcaster education at Libsyn, and I also run the School of Podcasting. My favorite stupid thing is, should I release at 1:35 p.m. or 1:42? It's time-shifted content. Nobody cares if it's 7 minutes different. So that's the one that, and they will literally obsess over, like, should it be 43 or 44? There are better things to focus on.
Stupid stuff in podcasting with the one and only Mr. Lou Mongella from WDW Radio. Lou, what's grinding your
Good to
gears?
see you, brother. You know what's funny? We come to conferences like this, and we're podcasters, but I like to listen more than I talk. And
That is an odd to jump in. That is an odd trait for a podcaster.
My friends would tell you otherwise. Like, you do not listen more than you talk, Mongella. But you overhear a lot of interesting conversations from people about what they think works in order to try and game the system. Right? Podcasting has become so big and so relatively competitive. People are trying to do anything they can to sort of be heard in a very busy and a very noisy space.
I think people always look for the hack as well. Like, the hack is such a silly goal, and because it seems to be the goal for people. They're not seeking the success. They're not seeking the downloads or the audience. They're seeking that one little silver bullet that will then lead to the fame and the riches that are often peddled by the gurus. You buy a course for $97. It's like you can do 6 figures in 3 days, and I almost feel like the hack culture is leading people to believe that podcasting is easier than it is. And I mean, you've been doing this for a long time with great success. You cannot hack your way to that. Right. That's consistency, and it's doing it right, isn't it?
Well, and to your point, and I hear this a lot too, where people talk about hacks, shortcuts, the silver bullets, and they talk about getting a spike. They get a spike in downloads. I'm like, well, but there's a second side to the spike, because if you spike, it means you're coming back down. And I think people lose sight of the fact that it's the retention, right?
Sure.
It's the long-term play. I don't want a spike in downloads. I want consistent and long-term growth. And I think some of the snake oil that gets sold is that. I did a call with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and that's what he talked about. And I said, yeah, but how do you keep these people as listeners? He's like, yeah, but that's, once you get them, that's on you. And I'm like, wait a minute.
That's going round a lot at the moment. And I know these type of the companies that are purporting to be able to get us these down, like you said, the download spikes. And you'll know this better than anyone, because the way that you positioned your brand, the way that you do things is very much a person-to-person scenario. And I think if you seek spikes, as you said, you're going to drop off there, but also seeking a spike in downloads as opposed to growth of people, if that makes sense.
the numbers are always there to be gamed in any industry, but it's what do you really get from that long term? There's nothing there.
We were just talking before we started recording about numbers, and you asked me numbers. I was like, well, I really don't check my stats all that much. And you laughed hysterically, but I don't, because I focus. I think so many people are focused on growth, right? For me, I look at the opposite. I focus on the people who are there. I focus on community, because what you really want to do is make people feel like they belong to something, right? You want to create this legion of evangelists, and they will go out and do the marketing for you. So my retention rate, I think, is good, because I'm not going out and tricking people to download with a freebie. Other people are going out and saying, oh, Mark, you like Disney? I think you would like this show. So the community grows organically. It grows authentically, and that's why people come, and I think that's why people stay. I don't focus on the numbers too much. And, I talk this all the time when I do a presentation. The only number I talk about, especially when I talk to a sponsor, is 94%. Because I surveyed my audience years ago, and 94% of my audience has bought a product or service that I've advertised.
Wow.
So that's the trust, right? That's the relationship that you're creating with the audience. That number to me, and I think to a sponsor, weighs much more than the vanity metrics of a download. You don't know how long that they listen to. Are they listening to the mid-roll, or listening to the post-roll ad?
Wow, 94% is crazy, and that just goes to show you can't build that on spikes. Can't build that chasing the next download. So that's wonderful. So do not chase the spikes. Lou, always a pleasure.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. All right, I'm here with Sam Setti. We're going to talk another stupid stuff in podcasting. What's grinding your gears, mate?
What's grinding my gears? We had a great event, didn't we?
Oh, well, one of us did. One of us had a great event at PME. One of us did. Fireworks.
Yeah. I suppose what's grinding mine is, I think, advertising is the emperor's new clothes.
Oh, yes, we got into this. Our panel at Podcast Movement Evolution is available on replay, I'm sure, from Dan and Jared.
Unless someone's deleted it.
Unless it's been deleted. All right, go on. Why is it the emperor's new clothes? Tell us a little bit about it.
So, look, I'm not saying advertising isn't a good model. I think it is. I think there are 3 models, subscription advertising and another one that may come along. But the problem I've got with advertising, and Apple proved this, is downloads don't equal listens. And back catalogue of your downloads, the auto download, has just been severed at the knees. So now you've got people going, oh, I used to have 10,000 downloads, now I've got 5. And the advertiser's going, hang on a minute, I thought that meant you have people. So that's the first thing that's happened.
Okay.
Listens in Apple and Spotify is anything over 1 second. That's not there.
Yeah.
That's got to change. So, and then I challenge the room and certain people on the panel. Tell me that you can actually say that the advert was listened to, and they can't, right? And then even if you think the advert's been listened to, human behavior is such. We all are listeners as well as creators. How often do you just skip past the ad? Now, I'm not saying you do it all the time, but we do it, right?
Well, I think we do. I think people, we're used to it with streaming services now. We're used to things like Netflix not having ads. I mean, I think Prime Video introduced ads even for paying customers.
Recently,
which is a wild thing. Everyone was up in arms about that. So
the BBC's just introduced.
I know,
ads.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if there was a report from Seb over at Global the other day, just talking about that, and I thought it's a very interesting problem for the BBC to almost introduce.
The report in the paper was that the TV license will have to be £200 a year to compensate for inflation and also the cuts that are coming elsewhere.
Right.
Now, a lot of people go, I can't afford £200 a year as a TV tax. So what do they do?
Yeah.
So they are saying, well, if you won't allow us to increase the TV license, then we need to bring in income from elsewhere.
Okay.
And then all the independents go, well, hang on a minute, you're stealing our money.
Yeah.
So they can't win.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to what's grinding my thing. Fundamentally, the advertising industry is saying to the advertisers, the podcast industry is saying to the advertisers, believe that people are listening to the ads and keep paying us, but we can't tell you if they are, and we can't track it. Now, there is a new model that would allow you to track it, and it's a quite out there model. Let me try to explain. What if you were paid to listen to an ad? So what if the money split was not just to the podcast creator for playing the ad, but actually if they gave some of that money also to the listener? Now your time and attention is incentivized to listen. Okay, you're going to give me a little bit of money? Yeah, I'll stick around to listen. But what that little bit of money does is gives a record back to the advertiser of how long you listen to the ad. So if you listen to 10% of the ad and then skip, they know that you were being paid for that 10%.
Yeah, for the part, okay.
And then the minute you stop listening, you skip, they stop paying.
Sure.
So now they will get metrics of time listened, percent completed. So suddenly you don't have to fake the numbers. You can actually say to the advertiser, you know when someone was listening because you were paying them, and you know how long they listened.
Sure, okay.
Now, that model won't come around tomorrow, but that is the model that I think we need to move to. Or one day someone's going to go, the emperor's naked, and they're all going to bugger off.
Well, I think you see that with renewals as well of advertising campaigns, and certainly after the big MRG phase that we went through when publishers were offering huge MRGs to talent, for example. I think it's very easy to see that renewals became more difficult because of, we talked yesterday on the panel, direct response is one method of measuring the efficacy of an ad campaign. It's not the only one, it's certainly not the most robust one, but it does work to a degree. But renewals become more difficult. It's almost diminishing returns in this, year one, it's fine, podcasting's a punt. Year two, well, what did we get from it? Well, it's okay, let's do year two. Year three, what did we really get? Because my manager's asking. And then there's a risk of that diminishing. But yeah, I hear that, my friend, and we'll get you on the show properly to talk about everything that you do. Truefans.fm?
It is indeed, yes.
Not Danny Brown, OnlyFans.
Although, if I owned OnlyFans, I'd be happy.
I love it, my friend. Always a pleasure.
All right, what did you make of that? Do you agree with Rob and Dave? Do you agree with Sam? Do you agree with Justin or Doc and Katie? Well, I'm looking forward to getting more stupid stuffs over at Podcast Movement in DC. Maybe, Danny, maybe you can be the person that stupid stuffs everyone. I think you'd be all right at that, mate.
I'm going to get a special jacket just for that.
Saying what stupid stuff on the back? Don't do that.
Right? Yeah, poke me for stupid stuff or something like that.
All right, well, we'll put that in the merch budget, mate. But I think we'll do a few more of those as well. We'll get some video. We'll get some audio out there in DC. Now, next week, we'll be back with episode 5 of In and Around Podcasting, and we'll be back to normal. We'll have a couple of co-hosts on here. Sure, we'll have more stupid stuff. Maybe we'll have a wonderfully whimsical podcasting wish list. Maybe we'll have a wave file, and maybe we'll indeed go deep into something that is bothering podcasters all over the world. Will it be AI? Will it be YouTubing? Will it be the consolidation of the podcasting industry? Who knows? But you can find us in your podcast app. You can find us at In and Around Podcasting.com and at In Around Podcast on Twitter. Danny, anything else? I feel like I've just done all the talking, dude. I'm sorry.
I'm used to it, mate. This is what attracted me to Captivate. I don't have to talk much. I just let you run it. Nah, I think obviously I wasn't out at the event. The Evolution, you and Kieran were there. It made sense to get the feedback and talk about it that way. So no, I'm looking forward to listening to this episode and seeing that, getting the feedback from listeners about the stupid stuff, especially from the industry people, because that's a different approach. Getting other people in the space, like in the hosting space, etc. So yeah, it should be fun.
Love it, mate. Thank you very much. And a big thank you to everyone that listens to the show. We got a lot of good feedback on In and Around Podcasting out of the show. People quoting the theme tune at me, people quoting some of the segments at me, which was really nice to see. So thank you to everyone that listens. And thank you to those of you that listen on your drive to and from Podcast Movement Evolutions. I know a lot of you did as well. So thank you so very much. We will be back next week. But until then, look after yourself and keep on doing what you do. Bye-bye for now.